Welcome to Lucky Fortune English Podcast, everyone. I'm Vincent, and today we're going to be diving deep into something I think a lot of you listeners can relate to. It's about how our sex lives change over time in relationships.
Yeah, that's right. And get ready for a curveball.
Okay.
We've got some research suggesting that it's not all about passion fading away, like we always hear.
Okay, so are you saying forget the whole like honeymoon phase versus been together forever kind of cliche?
Pretty much, yeah.
What's this research all about then?
So this study,
Yeah.
it kind of threw everybody for a loop.
Good.
They looked at couples who had been together less than 2 years, like peak romance time.
Right.
But the surprising thing is that none of those lovey-dovey feelings actually predicted how much sex they were having.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
So even if you're like totally head over heels, that doesn't mean you're guaranteed a steamy sex life.
It doesn't, according to this research.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
The old theory is that passion fuels desire. But this study suggests that it's much more about context.
context, you
Yeah.
mean like what's going on in our everyday lives?
Exactly. Stuff like work stress kids, even just having the in-laws visiting.
Uh-huh.
Those things can have a way bigger impact on intimacy than we realize.
So it's not about a lack of love or attraction.
Right.
It's more about real life getting in the way.
It really is.
Okay. I can see that.
And think about it. Those
Yeah.
things affect everyone so differently.
That's true.
What stresses one couple out might not even bother another couple at all.
Oh.
It's all about how each couple navigates those, daily ups and downs.
You know what? That's actually kind of a relief.
Yeah.
Takes the pressure off like blaming ourselves or thinking something's wrong with the relationship just because things,
Yeah.
shift a bit in the bedroom.
Exactly. And the study authors actually found that those classic markers of romantic love, like passion and commitment, even that like crazy in love energy,
Yeah.
they could only explain a tiny 4%
4%?
of the difference in couple sexual frequency.
Wow.
Yeah, statistically, that's practically meaningless.
So you're telling me that all that romance stuff barely even registers compared to just dealing with daily life?
Pretty much.
That's wild.
It is, and it really flips the script on how we view these changes in our sex lives.
Right.
Instead of assuming it's about fading passion, we can start to look at those practical everyday factors, and a lot of those we can actually control.
Okay, now this is getting interesting.
Yeah.
So what are some of those everyday factors that we can actually do something about?
Okay, so for starters,
Give us the goods.
the study highlighted just how much work stress can impact a couple's intimacy.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah.
If you're mentally and emotionally drained from a tough day, it's hard to connect with your partner on that intimate level.
That makes total sense.
Right.
When you're exhausted, the last thing you want to do is be vulnerable and intimate. Have you ever noticed how your own energy levels affect your desire?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like our bodies and minds just have a limited amount of energy.
Yeah.
And when we're depleted, intimacy often takes a back seat.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we just run out of steam.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so work stress is a big one. What else did this study find?
Well, I also talked about the impact of having young kids at home.
Oh, yeah.
Sleep deprivation, constant demands, trying to carve out even a few minutes alone together.
Right.
It's a recipe for intimacy going on the back burner.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
You need a master's degree in time management just to keep the family running smoothly.
Seriously.
For those of you out there juggling kids and relationships,
Yeah.
how do you manage to keep that connection alive amidst all the chaos?
It's definitely a challenge, and every couple finds their own way.
Right.
But the key is to remember that even small moments of connection can make a big difference.
Yep.
Even something as simple as cuddling on the couch after the kids are asleep or having a meaningful conversation while you're doing the dishes together,
Yeah.
those things can help you stay connected.
It's like those small gestures become even more important when you're in the thick of parenting.
Absolutely. And speaking of chaos, the study also pointed to how these unexpected events
Yeah.
can really throw a wrench in our intimate lives.
Right.
A sudden illness, family emergencies, or even just the added stress of holidays.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
The holidays can be a minefield for relationships.
Oh, for sure.
Even without factoring in intimacy.
Exactly.
But I guess what you're saying is that
yeah,
these are all just normal parts of life.
they are.
It's not a sign of a failing relationship if intimacy takes a dip during these times.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those external factors
Uh-huh.
and adjusting our expectations accordingly
Okay.
instead of beating ourselves up for not being as intimate as we should be,
Right.
we can acknowledge the challenges and focus on finding ways to connect within those limitations.
So it's not about like ignoring the stressors or pretending they don't exist.
Right.
It's about acknowledging them and adapting our approach to intimacy.
Exactly. And that might look different for every couple.
Right.
Some couples might benefit from scheduling dedicated time for intimacy, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Okay.
Others might find that focusing on non-sexual touch, like cuddling or massage, helps them feel more connected.
It's not about some like rigid schedule or checklist or anything.
Not at all.
It's about finding what feels good for both partners.
Right.
And being flexible enough to adapt as life throws those inevitable curveballs.
Exactly.
Speaking of curveballs,
Yeah.
I'm curious, what's one of the most unexpected contextual factors that you've come across in your work
Oh, that's a good question.
that can impact a couple's sex life?
You know, one that often gets overlooked is the simple fact of changing seasons,
Oh.
like seasonal affective disorder, those winter blues.
They can really affect people's mood, their energy, even their libido.
The winter blues affecting your sex drive. I hadn't thought of that.
It's more common than people realize.
Really?
Yeah. And it highlights how even things that are seemingly outside our control can influence our intimate lives.
Right.
It's not always about individual choices or relationship dynamics. Sometimes it's about recognizing those broader contextual factors and finding ways to manage them together.
This is all so fascinating.
It is, isn't it?
So instead of getting caught up in those unrealistic expectations of always feeling passionate,
Yeah.
we can focus on managing what we can control, communicating with our partner, and being kind to ourselves when things aren't perfect.
Exactly.
Does that sound about right?
You nailed it. Intimacy thrives on compassion, understanding, and a willingness to adapt to life's ever-changing rhythms.
I love that.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who are hearing this and thinking, okay, this makes sense, but what can I actually do about it?
What are some practical tips for navigating these contextual factors and creating a more intimacy-friendly environment? So many of our listeners are probably thinking, okay, this makes sense, but where do I even start? Like, what are some practical tips for navigating those everyday life stressors and fostering intimacy even when things get hectic?
Well, communication is key.
Okay.
And I don't just mean talking about what's stressing you out, although that's important too.
Right.
It's about talking about your needs and desires, both in and out of the bedroom.
Right.
Like what makes you feel connected, what brings you pleasure.
So many people just assume their partner should just know what they want.
Right.
But in reality, clear and open communication is so crucial
It really is.
for a healthy, intimate life.
Absolutely. It's also about making time for connection, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Okay.
Maybe it's cuddling on the couch after dinner, giving each other a back rub, or simply holding hands while you walk the dog. Those small gestures can go a long way in strengthening your bond and reminding you why you're together in the first place.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like those micro moments of connection can actually be more powerful than we realize,
They really can.
especially when life gets busy.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of self-care.
Oh, yeah.
When you prioritize your own physical and emotional well-being, you're better equipped to show up as your best self in your relationship.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup
Right.
if you're not taking care of yourself. It's hard to nurture your relationship.
Right. And sometimes self-care might mean saying no to things that drain your energy.
Yeah.
Or setting boundaries to protect your time and emotional space.
Right.
It's about prioritizing what truly matters and making sure you're not running on empty.
That's such great advice. And I think it's important to remember that self-care isn't selfish.
No.
It's an act of love for yourself and for your relationship.
Absolutely.
Speaking of love, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on one more thing from this study that I found really fascinating. They pointed out that simply being aware of these contextual factors can actually make a difference.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Just by understanding that these external forces play a role, we can start to view changes in our sex lives with more compassion and less judgment.
Right. It takes the pressure off.
Exactly.
So instead of blaming ourselves or our partners, we can work together to navigate those challenges
Yeah.
and find ways to keep the spark alive even amidst the chaos of everyday life.
Exactly. It's about being a team and supporting each other through those ups and downs.
Yeah.
And remember, every couple is different. What works for one couple might not work for another.
Right.
The key is to find what works for you and to
Mhm.
create a relationship that feels authentic and fulfilling for both of you.
This has been such an insightful conversation. It's definitely given me a lot to think about in my own life.
I'm glad to hear that.
So,
It's always exciting to explore these topics and challenge those old assumptions about intimacy and relationships.
absolutely. Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today
My pleasure.
and for sharing your expertise.
Of course.
And to all our wonderful listeners out there, thank you for tuning in to Lucky Fortune English Podcast.
Yes, thank you.
We hope this deep dive has given you a fresh perspective on intimacy and maybe even inspired you to have some open and honest conversations with your partner.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, subscribing to our channel will bring you good luck.
See you again.